Welcome to Let's Talk, and today I'm going to talk about how I create a paint palette for a model. And basically what that entails is deciding which kind of colors I want to use and what to use to highlight each of those colors, and how to get a general complementary between all of the colors. So if you guys remember in school, or maybe you're not in school, I don't know, they had the color wheel, which is basically all the colors in the rainbow and what's complementary and what's not. Now that works great if you're using primary colors, so things to think about when you're not using those colors. So for example, I'm painting my current army of Space Marines like this with kind of a nice khaki tone, and I went through to pick colors that would complement that well. And in short, I cheated a little bit and used the internet. I just typed in khaki complementary colors, and swatches is also a good keyword, and it showed me things that go well with khaki. So I mean, I probably could have just looked at military uniforms and figured it out because it's so obvious now, but things that go with khaki are, lighter browns, army greens, charcoal, not necessarily black, light grays, other neutral tones. So, and you can really do that for anything. So if you wanted to take green, for example, like let's say you're doing Dark Angels or some other kind of dark green army. So you have a dark green. And things to think about is areas you want to pop. So glowy bits, track lighting, eye lenses, lasers and power coils and things like that. You would want it to be an opposing color, right? So the opposite of green is red. So you paint those red, they'll really pop, they'll be very noticeable. Um, Looking at some of the other armies that I've painted in the past, I've done Crimson Fists. Now, their color scheme is pretty set, but if you want to do something that stands out, you just have to take little bits and pieces and do something a little different. So their main color is a dark kind of royal blue, and then their secondary color already made, of course, is a crimson red, right? So for the glowy bits and track lighting on that, I decided to do a yellowy orange, and that goes with the red, it goes with the blue. It's one of the third primary color, but because of its brightness and intensity and where it's used, just eye lenses and power cables and things like that, it really pops and it really looks really well, um, and just calls attention to those things as a point of interest on each model. So that's really good and an easy way to do it too. Other things to consider if you want some variety in color. A lot of people do belt pouches and belts and things like that, and they pick leather. That's classic brown leather kind of look. And that works great if you're painting fantasy models. But when you're painting a science fiction model, something that occurred to me a few years ago in my painting is, why do these science fiction people have access to cows or other animals that they can skin? And do they really have time for that to grow these things, etc.? It would probably be some kind of cloth, right? Something that is mass producible. You could just grow it and forget it. It doesn't require a lot of maintenance, kind of thing. So I painted all my belt pouches in army greens, and I painted all the straps in kind of a more of a green brown color, um, to show the idea that these things are just knitted together. They're cotton, they're, ballistic fiber and things like that. They're not leather from a cow, you know? And that's just for a science fiction style game, where everything is so cookie cutter, like Space Marines. They're all the same. They're all supplied very well and things like that. Now, if I was going to play something like Catachans or some other forest dwelling army like orcs or something like that, I might go with a leather. And the thing to keep in mind is having a variety of leathers. Don't just do them all with the same leather. It's not like they killed one animal and called it a day and equipped the entire army with it. So variety really helps. It'll give some variation in each model, give them their own little flavor, and kind of picks things out. It's the same for skin tone. Something I really try to avoid is just giving everyone the same skin tone in my armies, and on top of that, I try to avoid white people above all else, just because as a white person, they're pretty boring to paint, and it never looks quite right because you're comparing it to your own skin tone. And creating your own skin tone is pretty impossible to do. it would take forever and lots of mixing with any other of the base skin tones. So what I'll do is I'll use the Privateer press paints, and they already have lots of different varieties of flesh tones. So they do have pasty white people like me, but they do have a lot of varieties in color. So Midland flesh is more of a deeper tan. Think like Southern Europe kind of area. You have Cardic flesh, which has a little more brown to it, so you're starting to move east and into Upper Africa. And then you have the Idrian flesh, which is more of a red, so that would be like a Native American skin tone or Inuit or anything else like that. And then to achieve a nice brown skin tone, what I'll do is I'll take the Idrian flesh and mix a little brown in there to help darken it up. They do have one skin tone, quote, skin tone darker than Idrian flesh. It's called Beast Hide. And although it's in their skin tone area, I don't feel like it really matches anybody's skin tone. It just kind of is like a yellowy brown, and it looks more like a cow or a dog or something like that. So I try to only use it on things like satyrs and goatmen and stuff like that. I don't use it for people. Um, and then from there, once you have the base tone done, if you want more of a variety, when you do your washing, just pick a different flesh wash for each one. I use Privateer Press paints, usually the P3 brand. They have three different flesh washes. You have a flesh wash, straight up, that's just what it's called. The Cossite flesh wash, which is a little more brown, and then the Caspian flesh wash, which has a little more yellow in it. And that'll help you hit different highlights. So even if you want to paint everyone just the same one skin tone, by using different flesh washes, you can get more of a variety within your army, and show that your army is diverse and comes from many different areas of the world, or many different worlds if you're playing a science fiction game. Um, and then so that's just a few ideas on how to create some variety. As far as picking a highlight tone for your base paint, what would make the best highlight is taking your base paint and adding white to it, right? So that'll lighten the tone, and it'll still be the same color, and that way when you highlight it, it matches perfectly. Now the problem with that is because you're mixing the paint yourself, it won't always be the same. Once you run out and you mix more of the paint, it might be a little darker or a little lighter. And if you want kind of a uniform look for the highlighting, what I would recommend is whichever paints you're using, go to their paint line section and print it out. And usually it will be organized in shades. So you see they have browns to reds to oranges all the way down to yellows, and then we start hitting khaki into green, etc. and so forth. So what I'll do is I'll find a color I'm using. For example, if I'm doing Crimson Fists, I use Scorn Red because it has more of a crimson than their regular red. And I'll go 2 shades down, or maybe even 3 shades. I was using the Khador Red Highlight, which is an orange color. So orange highlighting on red, and you get a really nice crisp contrast. It really picks out the edges and things like that. Same if I was doing the Exile Blue, I would go down and highlight it with the Cygnar Blue. If I was using a Coal Black, I might highlight it with the Meridius Blue or Trollblood Base. Basically, any set of paint that's brighter than what you're already using will make a good highlight, even if it's just one step. But by using a completely different color instead of just mixing white, you can guarantee that all of your highlighting will match and it will all be the same. So that's how I come up with my paint schemes, and what I use is quick and simple and dirty. But if you want something a little more in-depth with, and you don't like using armor shade washes or separate washes or things like that, if you like to use washes that are paint-based, where you just take a dark color and water it down a lot, I would recommend the P3 Formula Mixing Guide, just because even if you don't use P3, things are easy enough to figure out alternatives too. So Umbral Umber is like a really dark brown. So just look for a really dark brown in any other paint line. Thamar Black is just black. So that's your base. You can shade it with black, And then you can highlight it. It says bootstrap leather, which is kind of a brown. So again, you have a really dark brown as your base. They're highlighting with a lighter brown. And then if you want to do extreme highlight, it even gives that option. So Rucksack Tan is a slightly yellower version of bootstrap leather. So we're starting at Umber, a dark brown. We're washing with Thamar black, a black. And then we're highlighting it with bootstrap leather, which is a light brown, and highlighting that highlight with Rucksack Tan, which is kind of a yellowy brown. And that'll give you a good gradient of colors. And you can look at Privateers Press's models. They're really known for the way that they shade up with their models, and it just blends really well. So I would recommend that as a great resource. It's totally free. It's on their website. And they keep it generally up to date as they expand their paint line ever so slowly. So that's pretty useful. Even if you don't use P3 paints, I would recommend printing out a copy of it. That way you can just see, you know, like let's say I'm using Citadel brands and I have a really dark brown, I can figure out what I might want to use to highlight and what I might want to use to shade with. And it just makes life overall easier and takes out a lot of the guesswork and testing, because if you're like me and you have shaky hands, you don't like going back to repaint models that you've messed up on. So something else that's super important I found, if I'm painting something where I want everyone to be the same, like Space Marines or something like that, basically any science fiction game, and I want kind of a uniform look between all the models, I write down what I'm doing. So, for example, this is for my Crimson Fist army. I wrote down, you know, armor plating, right? The basic armor plating. I wrote down what my main color was, Exile Blue. What I used to highlight it, Troll Blood base, which is kind of a greenish color, green turquoisey blue. And then I washed it with a blue tone to darken everything down. And I did the same thing for armor joint and stuff like that. Now, something unique I try to do on my Space Marines in particular is armor joints. Pretty much everyone just paints them that black rubber. And it just fades it away, and it doesn't add anything to the model. And the idea of painting it black rubber, even if you highlight it gray, is that it's a neutral, it doesn't bring anything to the model. So what I try to do is pick something else to use for dark crevices and things like that. So for example, on the Crimson Fist, a dark blue armor, I used a deep red burgundy on all of the armor joints. And for my current army of khaki, I used a deep turquoise to help bring it out. And the turquoise goes really well with the nice red earth-toned base. So the turquoise kind of provides a little variety, and after I go back and highlight it, it really pops without detracting away from the rest of the armor and the rest of the model, just because it's just adds more color to it. But because it's such a dark tone, it doesn't detract away from anything else. It doesn't call the attention away. Even just looking at the model, with the bright eyes and that way that smoke grenade is coming out, it really draws your attention straight to those things, which is how I try to paint. When I'm doing my highlighting and things, I will only highlight from the direction that the model is looking, and that will really help make it pop and draws in the eye, because if you look at the backside, there really isn't a whole lot of highlighting. It's pretty dark, so people aren't going to spend a lot of time looking at his backside. They're going to look at his front side where the highlighting is, draws the eyes straight in. And that's kind of how I come up with all my paint schemes and how I do highlighting and washes and things like that. But always feel free to experiment. I encourage experimentation. You know, buy one of those quick little starters for like $10-15 from Warhammer, just so you have a model to paint, and test things out. See what works for you, see what doesn't work, see what looks good. You don't even have to paint the whole model, just take a leg and paint it blue and test out highlights and things like that. Or any number of other ways of doing it. You know, have a junk model that you just use to test out color schemes. There's nothing wrong with that. Painting is a creative process, so always explore and try and find new ways of doing things. You know, maybe I spark an idea with my paint videos that I hadn't thought of, and that's awesome. You know, there's no right way to do things. There's no wrong way to do things. All you gotta do is paint in a way that you are satisfied with, which was the hardest thing for me to come up with. Is I always tried to paint in a way that other people would be satisfied. I never had any self-confidence in my painting. And I started selling my models on eBay, and people were actually buying them for a pretty extreme markup. I just sold a Redemptor Dreadnought for $100, and I painted it in a Crimson Fist style. And to me, that was really eye-opening because I thought that I was pretty average, and you know, I mean, people are paying above market value for my paint job. So that was really touching me. It was really inspiring. So, experiment, find a way to do things. I've been painting since I was 8 years old, and I am 30 now. So it took me 22 years to get to the point that I'm at. And the entire reason of making these videos is to help someone not take that long. Give you all the shortcuts and pointers that I know of. So just experiment and find new ways to do things and test out color schemes and pick something weird. Maybe you want to paint your army bright pink and do your army crevices in a nice yellow tone to help soften things up and give it a little texture and flavor in its color. And absolutely go out and try it. Do anything you want to do. Because at the end of the day, even if your opponent hates your army, it doesn't matter as long as you can go home and be happy with it. Have a good one.